Chris, thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Maybe before we get into your various companies you've been involved with and the effective accelerationism that you're involved with as well, maybe let's start with who are you? How did you get involved into tech? How did you make your way from Michigan out to Silicon Valley?
Yeah, so I guess so for some quick background, so my family has been in the auto industry in Detroit for the last 100 years. And so I'm the first in a couple generations not to be. And I was born in the suburbs of Detroit, grew up, went to public school, went to a public university, and learned to program all by myself and ended up getting a business degree in college. And one of my big aspirations in life was to continue that legacy of my family building things. But unfortunately, I grew up in an environment where the world has sort of shifted away from the industrial manufacturing of my ancestors, and the
Hmm.
new way to build stuff was with software. And for that reason, I moved out to Silicon Valley.
Very cool. And so your first job after moving out to Silicon Valley was with Apple. Um, Curious, like how did that experience kind of shape you into the person that you became and into the founder that you became as well?
Uh, yeah, so you know, Apple was a company I've always admired, and when I was in middle school, I sort of dreamed about moving to California and working for Apple, and I was really lucky. After college, when I came to California, I had nothing. I had no job. To be honest, wasn't even sure I'd get a job out here. And um, thanks to the sort of more just meritocratic ecosystem out here, and just the sort of when you interview, it's really about the sort of talent that you have and what you know. I ended up doing reasonably well in interviews, and lo and behold, one of the offers I got was from Apple, and so I was able to start my career there, and I'm super fortunate for that opportunity. I spent a couple of years at Apple working on a whole range of things we could talk about, but it's really instilled a couple of things into my ethos. So one is it gave me exposure to working in a large sort of technology company, both the things that I think are good to do, and you also learn the things that you don't want to do. And I think those are great lessons. But also, Apple is an amazing product company. And I learned firsthand how to design really great products, experiences, user interface design, and really honed some like my software development practices. I was a self-taught programmer, but being in a professional environment, working within teams, um, you know, really set the groundwork for uh, building my own technology companies. So I'm very fortunate for the years I spent there, as well as building the network of folks. Some of the best people I know in technology, worked at or continue to work at the company.
It's interesting. There's been this theme of certain folks. We had one of we had the co-founder of Warp, who was at Google for a while, and he also mentioned this kind of concept of things that he learned at Google, and also the things that he needed to unlearn. Curious if you have like any particular examples on both sides of that aisle that you kind of took away from Apple as you started thinking about maybe being a part of an early stage startup.
Yeah, so I'd say one of the things that you learn is working sort of cross-functionally with different disciplines. I think this is something you don't really get at every technology company. Apple obviously has from software engineering to uh, hardware engineering to silicon engineering, and the product design sort of goes across these silos in the organization. It's not organized like a business unit structure. And Apple's very specific, and you're really stuck in your domain. But I was able to work cross functionally, and I was able to learn how to integrate those functions. And I think that was something that I learned that Apple does particularly well. That I think is something very valuable. I think the stuff that you want to unlearn at most of these big companies, you'll find that as the companies that are this size, they grew to this size, and they obviously develop a lot of habits and sort of some call it like baggage when they get up that size in terms of overhead, and being able to sort of navigate the corporate bureaucracy can be really great to climb the corporate ladder. But I think these, in sort of like politicking around things like that. Uh, I only spent a couple of years at Apple, so I didn't have a lot of experience there. But I think the longer you spend, the more you're kind of optimizing around the bureaucracy, and you really want to unlearn that aspect. That there's, in a startup, there's no room for it.
Totally. You worked on the tribute for Steve Jobs at the 1 year anniversary of his death. I mean, I could argue in terms of the pressure that you must have been feeling that it's probably comparable to a lot of the experiences that you had, just because billions of people around the world are using Apple products. So I'm just curious, like, what was that process like, and how did you kind of think through honoring a man who's kind of so important to the history of technology?
Yeah, so I was super honored for that. I'd only been at the company, I think, just for over a year. I joined just shortly before he took a medical leave and then unfortunately passed away. And so I was really honored to be selected for that project. It was essentially a secret project that we put together just a couple of days before, and I was the only engineer on it. And it went on the front page of Apple.com and a few other places. And it was supposed to be this tribute to Steve that was sort of a gift, right, to the company and to customers, uh, and I was again really just honored and humbled to be part of that. Uh, and It wasn't a really technically difficult problem, but again, to build anything to the quality of Apple's experience and the compatibility that you need, and the like 30 different versions of it we
Mhm.
had just prior to launch, for one engineer to pull off was uh, one of the more challenging things I've done in my career. I did not sleep basically for 48 hours, like literally did not sleep. Stayed in the headquarters in Cupertino all the way like 10 minutes before the global launch of that tribute at like 3, 4 in the morning. So it was a really intense experience.
Sure.
It was very emotional too. A lot of the executives that were involved, even uh, Steve Jobs' widow, former wife,
Mhm.
was involved in that process. It was a very like emotional, sensitive project, and so yeah, it was a very surreal experience, especially
Totally.
very early on in my career.
Totally. So you've been working at Apple for 2 years. How did you know, when you met your kind of fellow Notion co-founders, that you wanted to jump that early? Then what was that process like? It's like, hey, I'm in the friendly confines of Apple, one of the biggest companies in the world, and yet I'm kind of ready and willing to join an early stage startup. What was that like mentality shift like, or how did you kind of think through that?
Yeah, I guess it's I didn't think through it right. It's kind of insanity. I came from Michigan and got this incredible job at this company I've always wanted to work for,
Yeah.
and was making pretty good money. It's paid off my student loans and all of that, and was sort of like living the high life. And I worked incredibly hard at Apple, and I worked on a lot of great projects. And it one of the reasons I came out to Silicon Valley is I wanted to work in big tech. I wanted to have that structure, but I always had the ambition to start a company. I wanted to start a company. And so after a couple of years at Apple, I sort of was at this deciding point where I'm like, am I going to continue my career here and maybe kind of get more trapped in the corporate machine
Hmm.
where I'm comfortable, or do I take the jump before it's a little bit too late and do something new? And I decided to do that, and I quit the company. Um, and I had a colleague who had quit actually just a few months earlier and went to a startup at the time, which is 23andMe, and Jessica Lamb.
Hmm.
And I remember sitting in my car trying, like right when I was about to quit Apple, trying to convince her to do this crazy thing and join me. And, we would, build this company. Uh, we thought about applying to Y Combinator, and, she ended up leaving 23andMe right after she started because she had just joined from Apple, and I left Apple, and we went to build this company. We had no idea what we were doing at the time. We really didn't even know what we were going to build, to be honest.
Hmm. And so, you're kind of building with her, kind of wandering in the desert, so to speak. How did you kind of come about the Notion opportunity after building with Jessica for a bit?
Yeah. So we went down this insane path because we're both software engineers, right? Uh, we were really unhappy with a lot of the developer tools we were using. So their initial ideas we had was to build all these like developer tools we wish we had. And lo and behold, in hindsight, it seems obvious. The market for those tools, or even building a lot of developer tools in general, is just it's a really hard sell. It's a hard sell to investors. These tools are actually hard to build, and we're building them, and we sort of stumbled on this idea. It wasn't really a product idea, but in 2020 or 2013, this is the year, web technology was rapidly evolving. Like there's this new idea called web components that Google was proposing. JavaScript just suddenly got like relatively fast. We had these, Chrome had a JavaScript compiler. There's these optimizing compilers coming into the browser. The HTML5 was really taking off. So the web really looked like this promising future platform where you might be able to get native performance. And that was, Jessica and I were both, she really loved building iPhone applications and working on iPhone. My background was really as a web programmer. We worked at Apple. We worked on some really interesting web technologies, and we decided just to double down and work on web technologies. And one of the sort of features that we believed would be really important going forward was this idea of real-time collaboration on the web. And back in 2013, this was not something that was super common. It wasn't like a feature built into a lot of apps. And we came up with this demonstration. It's called Sugarbox, which is a way that took any website and without plugins, without even browser extension, with actually just a bookmark, it could basically, it's almost like a virus. It would infect the website's JavaScript and actually then transform any website or content into this collaborative experience where you could share the collaborative link, just like
Mm.
Dropbox. The idea was it would be
Yeah.
like Dropbox. You could share the link, and then anybody could sort of collaborate, and there's all these features we could build on top of it. And it wasn't really a product. It wasn't targeted towards the market. It was this like technological demonstration. And it turns out another team was working on something very similar. Ivan Zhao and some others, they had this project called Concept. And when we were working on our project, we saw it and we're like, oh, there's other folks that are thinking like us. And I ended up sending the email to Ivan, who is now the CEO of Notion, and we ended up meeting up, and we decided to combine our teams. We ultimately then had four people after that, and that was really the thing that got what is now the modern Notion started. This is
Yeah.
back in 2013.
That's so cool. I was going to say, I feel like most people will see other teams working on similar things and, if anything, try to compete faster against them. I guess, was there any sort of debate in your mind about combining? I'm sure, it was a long time ago and it worked out in some ways. And so, or worked out very well, frankly, in a lot of ways. And so I'm sure it's an easy decision to look back on. But I'm curious if there were any kind of considerations back then or any thoughts about competing instead of collaborating, which I think is really unique.
So I think there was an absence of competition because we nobody had a product or a market. We
Mm.
had both built these sort of demonstration concepts that we released onto the web, and we got some people to use them. Uh, and our ambitions were to build something new, and we needed to really discover what to build with these technologies. It's sort of the opposite of how I think about building a company today, which is we're building these technologies. They seemed the web seemed to be this really promising place. The performance was improving a lot, and we knew form of collaboration was the future, but we didn't quite know what to build, and so I think it was really obvious that we should sort of combine all of our skills
Hmm.
and work on something. And so it actually was a super natural fit, and neither team we'd both sort of small teams independently had only been working for a few months, and we both had generated lots of different concepts, and none of them had users, and
Yeah.
none of them were really products. And so it was sort of like, well, nothing's worked. Let's just join forces, and maybe that will work. I don't know.
Hmm.
It
Totally.
was a
I,
interesting time.
it's crazy. You on X, you shared with me one of the early, views of Notion. It might have been Sugarbox at the time. I'm not sure. It's remarkable how similar it looks then as it does now. We'll have a link in the show notes, but to your point though, there's not necessarily, or at the time, obviously in hindsight it's obvious, but at the time there's not a specific use case for something along these lines. So how did you, in thinking about actually getting users and thinking about like figuring out what the hair on fire problem was, so to speak? I mean, the technology is extremely interesting and it still is, but how did you kind of think about like, okay, we have this concept, we have this technology, we have this inflection, so to speak, as it relates to the web getting more performant? How do we take that to the next level and actually find something that people want?
Yeah, so that was a very long journey. What we ended up doing is what we really wanted to do is build on top of the web with all these new exciting technologies they're coming into modern browsers. Uh, we thought the web was messy, and um, you know, uh, basically everyone on the team loved programming. One of the things we wanted to do was make programming more accessible and build a system where regular people could sort of not maybe not like program in the traditional sense, but could make computers do more useful things than some like cookie cutter application. Because back then, a lot of Y Combinator companies were like, cranking out the sort of like OG SaaS software companies. And we're looking at these things and we're like, well, it's like the same thing over and over again. Why can't regular people sort of build their workflows and use some of these ideas in hypertext systems like HyperCard was on the back, and some concepts in programming, and sort of collaborate and build their own applications and use computers in like a more humane way. And this is where we got super inspired. We ended up being uh, very principled. We went back in time because we're all like computer history buffs, and we looked at the competition between Apple and Microsoft, and this whole thing of Apple and Microsoft both stole the graphical user interface from Xerox PARC and all this,
Mhm.
and we saw that there was a lot of folks in the industry that had come up with new ways of interacting with computers, even some very early ones like Douglas Engelbart that had this online system. And there were all these ideas that in our opinion, didn't win because they were not part of necessarily Xerox PARC, and they never became part of the Mac and never became part of Windows. And we thought a lot of these ideas were really interesting and kind of sidelined over time. And they never got a chance to win in the marketplace. So what we ended up doing is prototyping a lot of these old ideas from the 1960s, 70s, 80s, and read a lot of the academic literature and from back then, and building these features, and try to make something that a regular person could pick up and start building a useful application in it. And we did that just hundreds and hundreds of times over multiple years, and we ended up going back and back again, sort of unfortunately, to the document metaphor, which is that people are used to using Microsoft Office and using Word and Excel and things like that. And so we wanted to make it familiar enough that, if you could use an Office productivity suite, you could use what became Notion. And so even though we tested all sorts of things, these Canvas-based, almost website, more like kind of builder systems, we liked the really flexible document format. And so that's sort of what won. And we tested that with a lot of different users, and that was the most familiar. And we ended up iterating with all these different features from these older hypertext systems or older concepts in computing. We had this idea of transclusion, which recently came back to Notion, which is the idea that you could have multiple views on the same data. Now today it's called synced blocks in Notion. And we had this idea that all of the data and information in Notion would actually be this graph, that you'd kind of traverse this graph and have different views. It was just years and years of building these features and testing them out. And, I wish we were more of a lean startup and sort of did the build, measure, learn. Like I read the lean startup book. Like we knew we should have been doing this, but we were so focused on perfection. We kept iterating, and then it really took to the point the company almost ran out of money that it was forced to launch. So Notion, has a very, probably what not to do and build a startup, but because no one else was building their startups that way at the time, I think it actually might be the reason Notion's successful.
To that point, I mean, I think it was 5 years, if I understand correctly, from the start of the company to the eventual Notion launch. I mean, that's similar on some dimensions to Figma, which had obviously working on similar principles as far as collaboration is concerned. And people lost faith, and it sounds like investors lost faith as well, running out of money. Like, what's your advice to founders who are going through these, trials and tribulations that can kind of, potentially help them get to the other side of this, potentially like company killing moments?
Yeah. So one of the things that I learned very intuitively is that the only thing that decides whether or not your company is going to live or die is yourself. So even if you run out of money, you can continue. So it's giving in and giving up that kills the company. And sometimes you have to take a hard look at what you're building and decide, okay, maybe it's not worth pursuing anymore. One of the things about Notion is, even very early on, and even many of the folks that left sort of early on, we all believed we were onto something. We believed that the ideas behind Notion, looking at these ideas that were sort of buried, pre-Microsoft, Apple, and building this experience on the web that was real-time and collaborative and was flexible, and even though we weren't tailoring it to a specific market, every time we showed it to somebody, they were just amazed by what it could do and how powerful it was. And so we always knew we were onto something. And I think having the conviction that what you're building and working on is maybe the single most important thing you can do is one of the lessons that I learned, and that even running out of money cannot stop that. And Yeah. So one of the things that I tell founders is really important, and I look for example, with in angel investing, is almost this uh, un like unreasonable, unrational um, persistence and belief that you can will the future into existence. And you'll kind of sort of do that at all costs. And like I said, there is a limit, but I think it's one of those things where, from a practical standpoint, you should just try to push that as far as possible. Notion is a is a company and a product that should not exist. It should have failed. It should be dead and buried. But it only exists because um, we kept pushing it forward. And credit to the remaining team, like Ivan and Simon. They continue to push it forward when it was sort of completely dead and there was no hope.
Yeah.
Investors had long given up on it, and the team had given up on it. And yeah, I think there's an important lesson learned there.
I'm curious about in terms of building that conviction. It sounds like for you guys, part of it was just like the underlying technology and the reaction that you were getting from folks. But I'm curious or as you're giving advice to other people or evaluating it and potential angel investments, like where do you recommend people get that conviction from? Is it like, and get that conviction, but also make sure they're kind of learning and iterating towards something that ultimately ends up working, if you will?
I think it comes from a few places. I think first of all, I don't think everyone's a founder.
That's fair.
I
Yeah.
I I think there's a specific mentality. Some of it, it's this faith that you can, will the future into existence. You can go through these really high and low times as a startup founder, and you definitely learn a lot as you go. I don't think it's for everybody. I think there's certain things about people's lifestyles. They have to make trade-offs. We talk about like work-life balance and these things with families. The most of the founders that I know, especially first-time founders that do not come from money, they really have to hustle to make things work. They're working at 120%. They're using 120% of the hours in the day. They're working all day and working all night. And I just don't think that, unfortunately, is for everybody. So um, for the folks that are willing to take up this amount of sort of hard work and these ups and major ups and major downs, I think that's sort of the first qualifier. And then I think the second side of it is just everything else. You can learn how to raise money. You can, if you're relatively smart, you'll learn about eventually how important markets are, and talk about it probably in a minute. About like Origin was sort of the other way around. We
Yeah.
did a lot of strategy and thought a lot about the markets. I think if you're of like average IQ, you have a decent education, you kind of learn all of that stuff. And so I really just come back to being super persistent and working incredibly hard on it. Because for the startups that I've seen in my career that have been successful, the founders work at a level of intensity that I think that most people are just not you know willing to do. And sometimes people work incredibly hard. It's just they prioritize their life across all sorts of things. I think that's an important aspect. I don't think it's I think there may be other types of startups that are successful, that are modeled a bit differently. But my companies, everybody just they worked so incredibly intensely and gave up so much to try to will these things into existence, that I know that if we didn't do these things, those companies wouldn't exist. And some of the other
Mhm.
companies I've gotten to know for my career, I don't think those would exist either. So I think this is like just the number one and most important thing, and everything else kind of
Mhm.
follows from there.
So, you leave Notion to start Origin. I kind of in thinking about now, learning a little bit more about your background. Maybe you could argue that this is the something that you were kind of meant to do, given your family's background and kind of being in manufacturing. Like, how did this interest start? Specifically with additive manufacturing and 3D printing, and how did you know you wanted to start this company?
Yeah, so this was another interesting decision. Notion had completely run out of money. I mean, payroll was bouncing, and I thought that was going to be the end of the road. And I think there's a lot of lessons learned there. We should have launched earlier. That I think the screenshot you're linking is the state of Notion roughly when we had run out of money,
So,
which is
yeah,
very similar to the Notion we have today. Uh, the Notion we have today is much more built out and refined, but the whole product was there.
sure, yeah,
And
it really was.
uh, so Origin was sort of a different challenge. I got a little bit disillusioned with building just software. That's what I had done, through my career. I did it at Apple. Notion, I felt, was this really flexible platform that really, sort of exhausted my skill set as a software engineer. Like it was like, what do you build after Notion, right? It's like
Mhm.
this system that you can kind of almost build anything on Notion, or the things you can't build in Notion, you could build in its architecture. And just as a very curious person, I wanted to just be in tune with the physical world again.
Mhm.
And my I was always around, like my building cars, and I worked in a, a shop that built race car engines when I was in college, doing web programming and like programming injector systems and stuff. And I really like the idea of going beyond this, like pictures under glass, having just apps on your iPhone or web apps on your Mac or PC, and building, using all of my skills to build software and actually impact the physical world. And so I really got into sort of like the maker community, which was really big at the time. And with the whole like IoT revolution, and because of smartphones, it suddenly got really cheap to get a lot of compute
Mhm.
into really anything you wanted to build. It was a really incredible time. And so when I was tinkering around, I just realized that because of smartphones, we're getting all these like really smart sensors, and the ARM processor, which had just some of them became 64-bit around that time.
Mhm.
We're getting so much more powerful. I was like, wow, I could write JavaScript code that can run basically as fast as C in a near real time system, and I can do all this incredible stuff, like with web technology, and basically robotics. And because of you have all these sensors, I can collect all this data, and I was just so excited about what you could build. And I thought the most obvious thing was when building these devices and starting to talk and work with hardware companies, uh, that the big issue was actually manufacturing the product. You'd have to go to China and build a supply chain, and you could 3D print something, but the quality of the 3D print, you're all familiar with like the FDM printing, like the MakerBot style printing.
Mhm.
That's like a hot glue gun on a plotter. It just doesn't have the quality you need for a final product. And so I looked at these high end industrial machines, that cost hundreds of thousands of dollars, and they're a lot better, but almost no one had access to them. As a like a hobbyist or as a startup, you normally have to contract out to one of the what we call a service bureau that would print you a product, and a little part would cost like $500.
Mhm.
And and I thought, wow, what if we could take these sort of industrial platforms and we could basically maybe not bring it into the home, but bring it into a startup so that they could, prototype something that's super high quality. And that was really the idea behind Origin. And sort of when I started to work on that, I went, well, actually, the only thing that's stopping us from, once you have the quality, is really like the material performance and the cost. And I thought, well, they have this dumb model where it's like the HP inkjet model where, you go buy from Stratasys and 3D Systems, the big 3D printing companies. You buy this like really low quality ink that doesn't perform like a high performance plastic. I had actually met these startups that were building these really, there's a Y Combinator company called Made Solid that was building these really inexpensive, high performance plastics for 3D printers. And I learned through them that like the chemistry could be learned and you could actually do a lot better than these old school 3D printing companies. And I went, wow, like if we use this technology, this material technology, we can actually print a final part. And I worked with some startups, and we actually printed shippable products with these sort of like hacked together 3D printers. And that's when Origin came together. I was like, this has to exist. Like we have to have some type of open industrial system where people can innovate and build new material technologies and build new software. And luckily we got this partnership with Autodesk, and they were building a 3D printer, and Origin was born as a company.
Was there a first product that you had? I mean, you kind of alluded to this, but like, yeah, I guess what was that first product that you kind of had that was like, wow, there's actually something to be done here? Like, what was it used for? Like, what was like that eureka moment? Like, tell us a little bit more about that.
Yeah, so there's this company called blockchain company called Chronicled, and this is back in very late 2015, going into 2016, and they were trying to tie luxury goods to the Ethereum blockchain. And this is back when Ethereum was like a couple dollars, you know, for each coin. And so this is the first time I heard of Ethereum. And they were trying to embed this sort of RFID tag, but it was a special one that could be tied to the blockchain with their specific software and all of this. What they wanted to do is they wanted to put this sort of RFID tag inside of a sort of plastic device with like a logo on it, and have a loop that would go onto a luxury product, whether it's footwear or a handbag or even like later like a piece of art. And they were, using 3D printing for prototyping. And the CEO of the company, Ryan Orr, he really liked the idea. One of the things that I was doing at the time was just working with these startups, kind of doing prototyping to get experience. Like, how do you bring a new hardware product to market using a 3D printer? And this is when I was really focused on the prototyping side. And Ryan Orr just got this idea. He's like, why don't we just 3D print, the final product? Because we don't know how many we're going to produce, and it's sort of like, and I'd learned from Notion, this build, measure, learn. I was like, that makes a lot of sense. Like, it costs all this money to send out for tooling into China, and there's all this lead time. By being able to 3D print one prototype that to a regular person looked like a final product, so it had the quality that you needed and the function that you needed, it's like, well, now you just need to make 10 of them, and then you need to make 100 of them, and then you make a few hundred, and you can test the market and rapidly iterate, sort of like we do in software. You could even do split testing. And so that's where, I think Origin really took off. The kind of the idea. Actually, Ryan Orr became the CEO of this company, became the first angel investor in Origin, and I think we'll talk about it in a minute. I was able to luckily convince somebody from Google to join me as a co-founder in this new crazy company. And we were working with Chronicled and a few other companies, and we were just trying to build a additive manufacturing process where it could go from prototype into production.
Mhm.
And we would be able to rapidly test different designs. And we weren't building a 3D printer. We were using this Autodesk printer. We were just building software and at the time relationships with sort of material companies, ecosystem partners at the time, or became ecosystem partners. And the goal was to just, kind of like be a contract manufacturer at low scale. But we weren't trying to productize this. We were just trying to learn it because we knew if we could learn to do this,
Mhm.
it was the key insight needed to push 3D printing from this prototyping industry into this much larger industry. So that's what we were really looking for, is like, what is this insight? And the best way to get that insight was just to actually do the manufacturing ourselves. And that's how we raised our sort of initial capital for the company, was really just on the faith that we would, that you needed this kind of open platform and these relationships, and that, we would continue to iterate our process internally and build all this software, have this software driven process that would allow us to mass produce some types of products for companies. And enough stuff was working at the time that some VCs took a look at, leap of faith and actually wrote some small checks for Origin. Unfortunately, Notion had not been successful yet, so there wasn't the advantage of being the second time founder, the massive success. Even though the Notion was already sort of there as a product, and folks were using it. Origin was really built in parallel to Notion, and so that's how Origin got started. And then I convinced Joel Ong, my co-founder, who was actually was a Notion power user. So he was a major Notion power user. He actually got in trouble at Google because we had put a quote on the Notion website, an endorsement from him when he was at Google.
Wow, classic big tech like compliance. Just
shut up, Google.
Always, always scanning the internet for some kind of scandal to get upset about. Yeah, wow.
And so I was like, okay, I'm going to convince him to, quit his cushy job at Google. He was actually at Google X, and later Google Chrome, and advancing his career very rapidly. And I'm like, you need to quit and join this, obviously Notion didn't work. So now you got to join this. I don't know what the hell I'm doing. I'm working with some hardware startups, and I'm, trying to produce these like products, and have no idea what I'm doing. So I need your help, and you should quit your comfy job and join me in doing this. And, he did. So.
I mean, from Joel's perspective, yeah, I mean, you're kind of laying it out. It seems, again, in hindsight, it makes sense. At the time, it seems, insane. So what do you think kind of won him over? A lot of folks are thinking like, I have this crazy idea for a startup, and, I think like you were at the time, maybe I don't have all these credentials. Obviously you would get them over the course of the coming years. And so what do you think, kind of brought him over the edge, or like what advice would you give to other founders who are kind of trying to convince a co-founder in a similar situation to, leave their cushy job and join them?
Yeah, I think the number one thing, I don't really think I thought about it at the time, is you have to have a conviction, and you have to have a vision. And by that time, there was a clear vision behind Origin. People can decide whether or not they believe in 3D printing. And that's sort of a thing where, it can be hard to convince people to believe in the future, right? But a lot of people think that it's a promising technology. And so, Joel believed that 3D printing was a very interesting technology. And, there was a shared vision that, you could go beyond just prototyping, which is this small market, and you could actually get into the, $10 trillion plus macro horizontal market of manufacturing. And there was also this trend at the time, Trump was elected president. There was sort of this idea that like sort of globalism, and I think this has actually been panning out,
Totally.
started to reverse, and you get reshoring into the US.
Mm-hmm.
And it seemed obvious that this technology was primed to do it. And it seemed obvious that the business model was a huge issue because the technology was not good enough.
Right.
You needed more players in the market. Like if you look at manufacturing, you have all these material providers.
Mm-hmm.
You're not you don't buy an injection mold and buy your molding material from the mold maker. You have all these
Mm-hmm.
big amazing chemical companies that have been around for hundreds of years,
Yeah.
that innovating fundamental chemistry. So we knew that the industry had to look different, and the fact that we were able to produce at a small scale for a couple different companies, some end use products that actually shipped. When Joel's kind of like working on this part time, he saw the fact that this was working and that customers were happy with the end result, and that it could be, this was a huge opportunity. And what we really had to do, because we had all the pieces at that time, was we just had to build out the platform. Like we needed to. At the time, we didn't want to build a 3D printer. We thought Autodesk would have that covered, and that's another topic being sort of uh, you know going into building hardware when we were not expecting to
Right.
build hardware. Origin was not supposed to be a hardware company, and the market sort of forced us into that. We thought if we just built the right partnerships and the right software, we would be able to build this great sort of manufacturing platform that really brought the advantages from software and split testing and analytics to hardware. And he saw that same vision. So I think you got to have the vision. You got to have conviction that it'll work. And then the other half of it is you really do have to convince people to join you. I think one of the things that I look for in founders now, if I make angel investments, is this, are these founders, especially the CEO, are they able to convince some of the best people they know to join them? I think it's a really great test. Like it's one thing for them to be able to hire somebody, but can they? You can ask them about the 5 to 10 people that they know that they think are really awesome, right? And then you can ask them, can you convince even one of them to join you on your journey, right? In your company, and I think the best founders that I know are able to do that, and they do that. It's an arbitrage opportunity for them because they get the best people early on. You want the founding team, especially, to be very strong. The first 10 to 20 people, you may not have the capital to potentially hire the best people. So the founders need to be super strong, and so you need to be able to convince them to join. And I think having a vision is the best way to do that. Shared vision.
So you move from software to hardware, to your point. I mean, obviously something that you hadn't done professionally just yet. And to my knowledge, I don't know if Joel had done either. What was that process like? You're like, oh crap, one day we need to build a hardware company, or like what kind of went on through your head as you were making that change as well?
Yeah, so that was one of the dark times at Origin. After we had raised money, and actually we had done our formal priced seed round with Floodgate. Mike Maples joined our board, and we were, we didn't know if we would be like a sort of a contract manufacturer type company like Jabil, with much higher margins, with a much more modern take, right, using additive manufacturing, or a solution provider like a traditional 3D printing company. We didn't know what the company was really going to look like at that stage when Mike invested. And I remember distinctly there was this board meeting that I was just regretting so much because Autodesk had canceled their Spark program, which included the Autodesk Ember, which was this 3D printer that we were building around that was open source. It's an open source industrial 3D printer. And, small, it had a lot of issues, but they were developing, a next generation one that was going to alleviate these issues. And it was part of our sort of real go-to-market strategy. And they Carl Bass got, pushed out of Autodesk. He's a great guy. They pushed him out and they shut down the program, and that was it. Autodesk was out of the game, and we no longer had a 3D printer. We talked to companies, we tried to at least, Formlabs, Carbon 3D. We wanted to get access to their systems and be able to take the software that we developed and some of the materials we're working on with partners to work on these platforms. And they wouldn't let us in. And they just said no, or they wouldn't talk to us. Different companies responded differently. And, I came to the board meeting with this information, and I remember Mike just, saying, well, it sounds like we got to build a 3D printer, and, and, we sort of the idea before, the pitch was, well, we were using this open 3D printer that was developed at Autodesk, and it's all like commodity components, and
Right.
in theory we could build it ourselves. And so there was this shared idea that the hardware was going to be commoditized in some way. But we never thought we'd actually have to build a hardware engineering team to build this thing, and manufacturing team and all this stuff. And so when Mike said that, I came back and we hired some of our first hardware engineers, and we set on this program to not just build what Autodesk was already manufacturing, but we set out to build a new 3D printing technology, which is now called P3, programmable photopolymerization. One of the main core, fast forwarding to today, like one of the main core tenant technologies in the 3D printing industry, right? As part of Stratus, the largest pure play 3D printing company that ultimately bought Origin. It is their technology that they offer for production scale polymer parts. This technology that we developed back in 2016, 2017. And we spent a really long time researching this technology. We also learned how to build a 3D printing company. We had to be very serious about intellectual property. Venture capitalists didn't seem to care so much about, especially at the time, about software patents and things like that. And we realized that patents and IP were extremely important in this industry. Like if you don't have them, you risk just being litigated to nothing, right? So you have to build an IP portfolio. And Autodesk, unfortunately, was unsuable, right? But we're just a startup. And so we decided, instead of copying what was out there or using Autodesk, which to be honest could have violated other people's IP, we didn't know. We went out and developed our own unique process. And because we already had these insights, we knew that the Autodesk technology was not ideal for manufacturing the products for our customers. And Joel was already working on a new process. And we doubled down, and we built that out. We continued our business, producing parts for customers. We scaled it down to where we only did test parts instead of doing production runs. And we doubled down on developing the process. And we got this idea that one of the best ways to develop this process would be to build what we call a material development kit, because materials in the industry need to get a lot better. They weren't good enough at the time. And we had just started to talk with BASF, the world's largest chemical company, and all of our investors, and I think even Mike at the time, was skeptical. This is a huge company, and startups generally don't want to work with companies like them. But we realized they had all these unique material chemistries that we could bring to market that they couldn't print on existing industrial 3D printers. So we actually tailored our process around theirs and a few other chemistries. So it would be very flexible with the chemistries it could print. And we built this development kit that we actually shipped to what became Henkel, which is another big chemical company, and BASF. And we spent a couple of years just doing product like material development, like low-level chemistry development with these companies, and trying to develop these chemistries into material products.
Mm-hmm.
Because as a 3D printing company, one of the major sort of products that you have, it's weird to think about it this way, but they're basically material companies. They're selling the actual 3D printing material. That the consumable business is a huge business for them. So we spent a long time developing the chemistries and products of these companies. And in 2018, we announced the first true open industrial additive manufacturing platform. So we launched Origin, which was really a partnership between us as a startup and this massive German chemical company, BASF, and we later added these other chemical companies to our network. And we didn't actually launch the printer at the time. It took another couple of years to launch the Origin 1. And so there's this sort of transformation of Origin as this idea and almost like a contract manufacturer to building and patenting IP to building this open business model with these really big whale companies, and then entering the 3D printing industry in this really direct way.
So interesting. And it's just, I mean, we've met a couple of founders, but you can count them maybe, I don't know if it's hands and toes, but maybe a couple people's hands and toes who've developed there's a couple people who kind of run the same playbook back. They're like, I'm a fintech founder. I'm essentially creating the second version of the fintech company that I had created. There's a couple people who are like, oh, I've created something in events or created something in security, essentially run that back in a different way. But I think hearing from you with these like extremely like distinct experiences, there's not that many founders who've been able to do so. So it's just extremely impressive. And then I can talk about Origin kind of all day as well. But I also wanted to leave some time for this thing that I started seeing getting more popular on Twitter, E/aACC, effective accelerationism. What does that mean?
First of all, it's EAC, right? So people first of all ask how to.
I was about to say that too. I was like, E/ACC sounds like a mouthful, so I'm glad there's a shorter version. That's helpful.
Very, very helpful.
So the cool kids call it EAC.
Good.
It's
you can be cool now, Steph.
Good, yeah. And then I'll learn what it is, and I'll be even cooler.
Yeah, 100%.
So EAC is really interesting. Now that I've been sort of Origin has exited, as it merged with Stratasys some time ago, and I finished up work with Stratasys, the sort of post-merger integration to make that successful, shipping under a new version of the platform under Stratasys umbrella. I finished that up in earlier this year in May, and sort of was taking a break. And one of the things I like to do, and I can spend a lot more time now, is just working with founders, both like as an angel investor, but I really like startups, and I love working with founders. It's just something that if I'm not doing it, I just just kind of like get bored, and I just love the excitement of early stage companies and the enthusiasm and all this, and so I started just really getting back into that because now I have a vacuum. I don't have my own company anymore. It's the first time in a decade where I went from Apple to Notion to Origin, and I didn't take any breaks in between. It was one after the other. It was a speed run, and so I took some time and traveled all over Europe and Asia, and that was a great experience. But then I realized, I spent so much time building. I never really tried to build like a social media presence. I like Origin and Notion did a very like traditional marketing. None of the founders of any of these, what Origin, Notion, all my co-founders, like we don't use social media very much. And so I started, I actually was in Mexico City with Mike, who's on our board. And he's telling me about the magic of Twitter, but it really starts when you sort of have a following. And and I sort of took that up as a personal challenge. I was like, I should. Mike made some good points about the value of a platform like Twitter. I should try to actually build instead of just lurking on Twitter. I should be more active and try to maybe use it to talk to other founders and just see where it goes. And that's what I did. And I sort of was able to build up a following on the platform, and I was able to discover EAC, which is this effective accelerationism. That's sort of this movement. I was able to discover it at a really opportune time. Right, it was before most people, even on the platform, knew about it. It was super nascent. It had been around, I think, for a year. And what it really is it's first of all, it's founded by some folks that are actually very impressive. That now I know who they are. They're still a officially people. The public does not know who these folks are. They're very impressive. They came up with this sort of ideology, the EAC ideology, about a year ago, and I noticed I shared their same ideology, and there was also this sort of nascent community of folks that share this ideology, and it's really the ideology means different things to different people, but I'd boil it down to it's optimism, like it's techno optimism, but not just being optimistic about technology of the future. Is optimism about acceleration of this like techno capital machine, and it's optimism about that capitalism is the best system that we have. It's optimism about individual responsibility. You have the power to will the future into existence, and it's just something that resonated with me so much because since I had been in Silicon Valley, these are just some of the core principles that I lived by. I believed that I and others, instead of being trapped and limited, you can go and you can build something. You can will the future into existence, and we don't need to be ashamed of capitalism. Capitalism can be a really great system to improve, your standard of living, and it gives you opportunities, especially in this country, the United States, that you just may not exist anywhere else. And that the other thing that I noticed over the last couple of years living in San Francisco is there's this force of deceleration, this force of people that want to stop progress. They don't want to build. They don't want to build housing, right? They don't want to. They push back against self-driving cars. This force that's pushing technology back, and this group of folks that have the same ideology that I have, which, to be honest, is like what I think is like the OG Silicon Valley ideology, which is it's a bit of libertarianism and capitalism and individual responsibility, and it's just kind of withered away a bit, and so there's sort of folks banding together around this new banner. And so I got involved right at the same time, right after like Mark Andreessen got involved, but roughly the time Gary Tan from Y Combinator also got involved, and the movement really started to take off on Twitter, now called X, as a platform. And I saw it as an opportunity, especially because I'm no longer building a company. It's like, well, why not help build a movement, right? Like, why not actually help accelerate this movement and see what I can do about that? And so that's how I got involved. And it's been a really interesting couple of months on that respect, with like a lot of progress and a lot of stuff that's been happening. That's pretty exciting.
I'm curious. I had no idea that the founders of the movement were anonymous, and I'm curious, is that because of like controversy or pushback? Or I'd love to hear more about the resistance that you guys are getting, or why they may have chosen to stay anonymous, for example.
Yeah. So for folks that want to look them up, there's a play on Jeff Bezos. Beth Bezos is one of the
Good to
founders
know.
of EAC, as well as another on X creatine cycle, also known as Atlas. It's like these, you know, almost like caricature Twitter anons, right? That started this movement, but now they're in like articles like on Business Insider, and they're the founders of the movement, right? And so I got connected with them uh, directly, and you know the reason I understand that they're anonymous, there's sort of two sides to this. So one is that some people think are these like 14-year-old kids in their parents' basement trying to like build a online movement or something like that. They're not. Uh, they're really accomplished, really well respected folks. The folks that have met them, all the there's a reason that big venture capital firms and investors fly the EAC banner and believe in the ideology. They've met all the founders of the movement, and they're very legitimate, and they've worked at some of the great companies, and they have really amazing CVs, and they use the anon banner because this sort of ideology, the EAC ideology, had become, just the ideas of it had become somewhat controversial in Silicon Valley with some of the things that have happened over the last couple of years. And so, some of them were just afraid that their employers, would sort of shut it down, right? If they use their own name. So that's part of it. And these folks, by the way, as far as I know, are no longer like at these big tech companies. They're all building their own companies as well. They're building a movement, and they're also building companies, which is incredible. I think they're awesome founders in that regard. Like a case study, and in what a founder, with a lot of willpower, can potentially pull off both a movement and build a company separately that people don't know about, and not just some dumb company. These are some really, really impressive companies that are being built. The other side is to avoid this like decapitation attack. So EAC is supposed to be a decentralized movement. And so by just having these anon accounts, the idea whether somebody has credentials or not, right? They have credentials, and if people knew about it, they would view it through some lens. Or let's say they didn't have credentials, right? It's about the idea itself being built from scratch. And that's what I really like about these anon accounts is the only thing people care about is the idea, EAC itself. These are not real people. They're real people, the anons, but they don't have any of the baggage of the past tied to them. Their credentials, what university they went to, what companies they built, all this stuff. And I think that's a really interesting thing. I don't know of a movement of this size that's really been founded by anonymous folks besides like Satoshi Bitcoin.
Yeah.
So, but in this case, these guys are still around. So I think those are the two reasons why. They may have other reasons as well.
Maybe the last question before we get into rapid fire. What's the future of this movement? Where do you see it going from here?
Yeah, I think it's going to continue to build. It hasn't died down. More and more folks are joining it. They join the spaces. There's more sort of mainstream press. I think the next major step for EAC is to sort of take this step off, X or the platform into some like a more mainstream audience.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's really the next major step. And I think you sort of adjacent to that, one of the things that's really caused EAC to blow up is this idea about AI safety. So there's folks that want to slow AI down and decelerate it and regulate it away. And so a lot of folks in the machine learning community have joined EAC, a lot of venture capitalists as well. because we believe that technology like artificial general intelligence will be this incredible technology that could will a future of abundance, and we don't want to prematurely kill it when there's no evidence that it's harmful. We don't want to prematurely regulate it. And so the folks that believe we shouldn't decelerate AGI, we should actually accelerate it and embrace it. A lot of those have joined EX. So EX become kind of this counterforce to this AI safety narrative that you see, especially in the mainstream media. And there's some powerful forces at play that have been in the AI safety game for a long time. Institutions like MIRI, and EAC has now become a counter of that. And so one of the major things, besides EAC becoming more mainstream and getting off X, is uh, ensuring that AGI and AI don't get prematurely regulated. And that involves things right now, which uh, mean banding together with folks. For example, in Washington, D.C., and actually looking at public policy initiatives that we can propose as a movement to ensure that the incumbents in the industry don't sort of regulatory capture
Right.
or some of the other groups that maybe their interests are just to slow things down, that they don't win, that there's actually a real counterbalance narrative to those folks. So that's what's coming next for EAC, and I think it's super exciting.
Very cool. Thanks so much, Chris. Maybe we'll wrap it up. Steph, if you don't mind leading rapid fire.
Yeah. So these are meant to be top of mind, whatever comes to mind first, questions that you answer in a sentence or less. So the first that we ask is the founder that you look up to most.
I would say, um, first of all, there are many, but if I have to choose one, it's Jensen, the CEO and founder of NVIDIA, and I respect him so much for a lot of reasons. But the fact that he still runs NVIDIA after all these years, and it's a hardware company, I know how hard hardware companies are, let alone a semiconductor company. Uh, and just it's one of the great Silicon Valley success stories. It's one of the great companies, right?
Yeah.
And it's founder controlled, and I just think he is inspiration in just having this long term vision and doing whatever it takes to make NVIDIA successful. His entire life is dedicated to it, and the AI, like the entire AI ecosystem that we have today, would not exist without them building accelerators that cater to this market. I think folks don't realize what an important aspect NVIDIA's played in this. So Jensen for
Absolutely.
sure.
The book that most changed your life.
Um, there's a couple. The one I really like, especially for founders, that I think has really impacted me is Zero to One by Peter Thiel. So I think this is really the ultimate book on category creation. Before like this idea of category creation really was even talked about, and it's just like build something that's truly unique, which is something that just really resonates with me. Try to create a monopoly. Uh, that's like the point of capitalism. Yeah, monopolies are bad. We don't have to get into that, but like that's what you should be trying to create, and having a really clear vision of what the future looks like. So I think this is one of the best books I've ever read, and maybe one of the best books founders could read, and is just as relevant today as it was in the past.
Yeah. I guess related, what is your favorite account? It could be anything from a newsletter you read, a Twitter account you follow, it could be a meme account, anything. What's your favorite one?
Uh, so for Twitter, uh, I guess we can link it, but Beth's account for EAC is a total must follow. It produces a lot of great content, and for folks that want to understand uh, what EAC is, I'd have to say that's like my current favorite.
Love it. And I guess the last one, and this is one just for you because I'm curious. Is there anything that you evaluate in potential angel investments that you feel like you overweight versus the average investor, just given your experiences with Notion, Origin, or your personal, entrepreneurial experience?
Yeah, so I look for founders that are just almost like pathologically persistent. So part of it's looking at the sort of the founders and their traits. I know ideas and things change, like been there, done that with Notion and Origin. So I try not to focus too much on like the idea, or even sometimes the market. And I feel like this is different than how a lot of other venture capitalists look at founders to some extent. And I think, another thing is that I think I have a lot of experience now in deep technology, including AI. And so I really like to understand the nuts and the bolts of a technology. And I don't want to intervene with a founder when they build their own technology, but I feel like I can understand what they're building and like to really evaluate that. And I know a lot of venture capitalists don't go into the like sort of deep tech realm. There are some funds. So I do focus on this like deep tech aspect. So not afraid to make investments in some really deep tech companies. I invested in a great company I'm really proud of called Lumafield that does very low cost CT scanning, and has built this entire ecosystem and software around it, and to be honest, revolutionized the CT scanning industry. And so companies like that, I'm just like super excited about.
Very cool. Yeah, well, for my deep tech friends, it's much needed because it's a bloodbath out there trying to get supporters, as you probably know from building in the space. So, well, Chris, this has been awesome. Thank you so much for joining us. And yeah, I learned a lot even in just the short conversation.
Thanks so much, Chris.
Yes. Thanks for having me.